Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. It's great to be here, as always. Looking forward to today's Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday topic, which is going to be on digestive plaque. If you've never heard about digestive plaque before, I would love to be able to provide those details with you today. But of course, never just sharing with you what it means, who may have it, if that might be you or one of your loved ones, but also what to do about it, because it's not enough just to say, okay, I may have this, and kind of, okay, well, so what? We always want to make sure that we're able to take action in the real world. I could give you some insane protocol or things to do in some $5,000 rare herb that you can only find in the Amazonian, jungles. But what we want to do is we want to be realistic. We know that everybody's busy, everybody's short on time, but at the same time, we can't continue to neglect our health. If we continue to put our health off day in and day out, eventually it catches up with it. We end up with Hashimoto's, we end up with rheumatoid arthritis, we end up with MS, we end up with lupus. Those things are not by happenstance. It just doesn't, okay, well, all of a sudden I woke up today with Hashimoto's. It does not work that way. There is a predisposition to those dis-eases of the body, but things absolutely do lead up to them. You could say, well, my mom had it, my grandmother had it. I understand. They all had the same genetics as you, at least in terms of the expression of this specific autoimmune issue. But here's the thing. Maybe they got it at 35, you got it at 27. Well, if you have the same exact genetics, well, why didn't you get it at 35? Why'd you get it 8 years earlier or so? Well, here's the reason why, is because the expression of those genes and the presupposition to that specific dis-ease only happens when we allow for the expression of it. And so the next question goes, well, I never wanted to get this disease. I didn't allow for the expression of it. And I would say, you're absolutely right. You are not looking to have this disease. I understand that. You believe that as well. Here's the thing. We do things and we're exposed to things unknowingly. So we don't always know that dairy and gluten and other things could be affecting our immune system. We don't always know that we have this buildup, which we're going to be talking about today, of digestive plaque. We don't always know that we have intestinal permeability that's allowing typically harmless foods and bacteria and fats to enter our bloodstream, causing molecular mimicry, causing inflammation, causing all sorts of genetic-based predispositions. But here's also the interesting thing. When you begin to realize this truly is always a filling up of the rain barrel effect, then we say, well, if you filled up the rain barrel, you can most certainly empty it. If you fill up your rain barrel, you can absolutely empty it. And we empty it by learning what we did in order to fill it up. Some of us have a much taller and larger rain barrel than others. My rain barrel, not so big. It's just, that's the way. Again, sometimes genetics, we get these specific cards. But for me, it's okay. I understand, because I now know my body. And that's what this podcast is all about. It is an exploration of us, the unique individual expression of us. I could go way back and say, well, all my grandparents had autoimmune issues. Both my parents had autoimmune issues. And then in utero, I was exposed to this, this, and this, or I wasn't born with this much gut bacteria, or maybe I was born with candida overgrowth. Like, we can suppose a lot of different things, but honestly, none of that matters too much. It's a good exercise maybe every once in a while, but the truth is that does not help us in any way, shape, or form. What truly helps us is, what are we dealing with right now? Okay? What you're dealing with right now, or maybe what your parents had, is most likely, at 90% of the time, what you're going to tend or trend towards. I know that I trend towards blood sugar dysregularity. I know that I trend towards Th2 immune dominance, and along with that comes asthma, allergies, histamine-based issues in general, right? Being very sensitive to the outside environment, as well as certain foods, high histamines foods, etc. That is absolutely what I'm predisposed to. Now, when I empty that rain barrel, okay, I don't feel any joint pain. I don't have any allergies. I don't have any asthma. I can go run a 5K like I do all the time. No issues at all, every single week. It's no big, multiple times per week. No big deal. So, but I know that that's in the background. I know that the rheumatoid arthritis is there. I know the blood sugar, type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, all that is in the background. I know the presupposition to mastocytosis, other things are there. I know that. Okay, so then what do I need to do? Well, I need to realize all of the different things that allowed me to previously have all those issues, the Addison's disease, the POTS, the fibromyalgia, the autoimmune, the type 2 diabetes, etc. Okay? So those have been fixed, and I want you to know that a big part of much of our health issues has to do with our gut health. I only know this because I spent years trying to figure it out 20 years ago. So what I want to share with you now is to say, here's at least one part of potentially, again, I can't diagnose, treat, or cure disease. That's not what natural health practitioners do in any way, shape, or form. Unless you're a licensed medical doctor practicing in your own state, only you could give that diagnosis. What I like to do is I like to work in the real world with real people. So I say this. We're looking at underlying root causes that lead to the expression of what conventional medicine would diagnose you with as a disease. Personally, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I don't really believe in all of these diseases. I believe in the symptoms that you experience, no doubt about that. I believe in those symptoms. I felt them as well. The problem is the name of the disease is simply your collection of symptoms. Your collection of symptoms most certainly came from underlying root causes, one of which might be what we're discussing today. So let's go over that now. What is digestive plaque? Now that I built it up, what is digestive plaque? Well, and why do I call it deadly? Here's the reason why. It's like anything. If you allow plaque to build up in your teeth, in your mouth, around your gums, it can lead to cardiovascular disease. It can lead to inflammation in your entire body. What happens if you allow for plaque to build up in your arteries? Well, eventually the plaque continues to occlude those arteries to the point where blood can no longer flow through, and you have some type of myocardial infarction or some type of issue where heart attack, you can't get blood to flow through. We call it a cardiac event, right? So those are deadly. Now, in your gut, it's a little bit different. Not drastically different, but a little bit different. The same thing is happening. We are allowing this mucus or mucoid plaque or digestive plaque or biofilms, which I described in depth on episode 1502. If you've never heard about biofilms before, I am going to link it up today. I'll actually embed the show inside of, if you go today to StephenCabral.com/1678. StephenCabral.com/1678. I'll embed the show right there. Also link to some of the research, etc. Okay, so here's the thing. We build up this plaque, and the plaque gets built up in our digestive system. That plaque is essentially this rubbery, gel-like substance. It can often be green in actual look. So we essentially have all of, and I went through on episode 1502 what biofilm is, what it's made up of. Today I want to give it to you more of a foundational-based approach because we want to look at this a little bit differently. I'll tackle the same topic many times, but I do it from different angles so that integrative health practitioners and anybody alike is able to understand the problem, what needs to be done, and also I want people to know it at a foundational level. Like, okay, this is what it is. Here's what it comes from. I know now how to get rid of it, right? That's what we're talking about. So this biofilm is the thing that nobody talks about. I think I actually called that the name of episode 1502. The root cause of most hard-to-heal illnesses is this biofilm issue, and here's why. It's deadly over time. Just like plaque builds up in your arteries around your heart over time, and plaque builds up in your mouth over time, same with your gut. And your gut then, when improperly balanced, leads to a host of inflammatory-based issues. Well, you might say, well, Okay, well, what's an inflammatory issue? An inflammatory issue is essentially the disease names we give people, right? So an autoimmune issue is inflammation, brain fog, inflammation, fibromyalgia, inflammation, lupus, inflammation. Like people say inflammation is the root cause of 90% of a disease. Well, that's actually not true. I would say this: inflammation is implicated in 90+% of all disease, if not 100%. I agree with that, but it is not a root cause issue. Inflammation is mediated by the actual root cause. Let me say that in a different way. Whatever is the true issue with your body, and it's basically one of two things. It's a toxicity or it's a deficiency. Okay. And I would actually, there could be a pain element to it, which then presses on the immune system, and I should say central nervous system, and then affects the immune system, right? Because I did a whole podcast on the neuroendoimmune system. I can't go through that today, but everything tugs on everything in your body. But before I go down a deep rabbit hole, understand this, that your digestive system, in and around your digestive system, is responsible for 80% of your immune system, which means this, that if you have an immune-based issue, which means if you have an inflammatory-based issue, it could be coming from the gut. And I often believe that most people, it may not be the sole issue that they're dealing with, but it is certainly one of the top issues they're dealing with is a gut-based issue, and oftentimes a biofilm issue. And this is where many, many, many well-intentioned practitioners go off course, is that they'll be using the oregano, they'll be using the clove, or they'll be using let me think of another exotic-based herb, a Marina pudica or something like that for parasites. You might be using an ancient Ayurvedic-based herb as well, maybe using some triphala, something like that. Okay, all of these things can be fantastic for the gut. The issue is, if you are not actively working on the biofilm, which those are not specifically, then what happens is you're not always able to access the underlying, we'll call them gut bugs that may be living there that's keeping your gut imbalanced. So here's the issue. Let's take this from the top. As we develop a biofilm in the guts, oftentimes because of yeast overgrowth, parasites, H. pylori in the stomach, which then doesn't allow for enough stomach acid, which doesn't allow for enough bile. And if there's not enough bile, that bile is actually a way, it's like an antitoxin. Bile is supposed to move through a lot of the toxins in your gut, but not enough stomach acid. You're on a proton pump inhibitor, you're on Nexium, you're on Prilosec, you're on Zantac, you're on something. Those are blocking then stomach acid. You might say, oh, good, well, I don't have heartburn anymore. No, not good. Because then what happens is you don't produce typically enough bile. You don't kill enough of the bacteria in your stomach, so that bacteria gets a free ride then into your intestines. Now we end up with something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So we've got bacterial overgrowth. Typically when we have that, we have some type of yeast overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, and then what happens after that is we begin to build up these biofilms. The biofilms are loaded with potentially heavy metals. They're interlocked with all sorts of different fibrin, which makes them stronger. But then the other issue is this: we get inflammation. We get a blocking of the immune system. We actually, believe it or not, some of these gut bugs, and especially mold, begins to turn off certain parts of your immune system. It's amazing, but these specific living entities, like a yeast, a fungus, they can actually shift and turn off some of your immune system. And it does that for self-preservation. These are living things fighting against living things. And they honestly, they get almost a free ride from being removed in the stool when they live under this gel rubbery substance, this biofilm. And again, this is scientifically validated. This is something that wasn't really talked about 10 years ago, definitely not 20 years ago, but for sure we know about it now. And good practitioners that I learned about did know this 10, 20 years ago. It was just much more rare. But yeah, people talking about it more. And as we talk about it more, well, it becomes more mainstream. And that's my goal, is to teach people how to make sure that we're able to remove these harmful microorganisms living in our gut. The big four: H. pylori, parasites, yeast overgrowth, as well as bacterial overgrowth. If you can remove those and balance them to their healthy levels, not totally sterilize your gut, but balance them to healthy levels, well, you're going to be doing a whole lot better. And then you can also seal up the gut wall. Because if you're only working on sealing up the gut wall, I'm telling you right now, you're going to have to do that forever, because there's always going to be inflammation. So there's always going to be a separating of those gut lumen or lamina propria, or those single cells between your entire gut wall. So what we want to do is we want to remove, you could seal at the same time if you want, but we typically do it afterwards. I've done a whole show on our CBO protocol. I'm going to have my team, if my team is listening right now, please link up our CBO protocol at stevencabral.com/1678. That's today's show notes page. I take you through our entire CBO protocol. I don't want to go over that today, honestly, because I want to get into today's topic, and obviously I'm into it now, but I want to get more into it. I want to just share with you for free exactly what we do. So that I'll link that up today. That'll be at stevencabral.com/1678. So you understand, so I don't have to take you through it now, how to remove the biofilms, okay? Then how to re-inoculate with the good bacteria, and then sealing up the gut wall as well, all right? So that's very, very important. The removal of the biofilm, the removal of the microorganisms, which is the yeast, the bacteria, and parasites, whatever might be living there, and then the basically rebalancing, which is bringing the gut back to life. But the thing is, most people, though, again, don't know about this, don't even know about there's a biofilm that can exist in the gut and how prevalent it really is with all of these issues, whether it be immune issues or digestive issues. So they go on for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, allowing these biofilms to proliferate. They do not go away on their own. That's a really important point that I want to make. It's kind of like the ostrich with the head in the sand type thing. Well, I'm just hoping it goes away if I don't eat these specific carbohydrates. Like that's what a lot of people are doing right now with their, diets that totally remove carbs. They're very low in carbs or very low in specific carbs. It's basically burying your head in the sand and saying, well, don't eat those because they cause joint pain, or don't eat those because they cause brain fog, or don't eat those because they cause inflammation in some other way or gas, bloating, etc. Well, I mean, you can continue to say that, but you really should be able to eat carbohydrates. You shouldn't paint them as the enemy. The longest lived populations of the world, the predominance of their diet was carbohydrates. Now, it's not high glycemic carbs, of course not, but it's certainly carbohydrates, and it's certainly fiber-based. And if you can't eat prebiotics and you can't take good starchy-based foods into your diet, again, whether you want to or not is up to you. But if you can't because of digestive issues or pain or immune issues, that doesn't mean remove them. What that means is that is a symptom. That is a glaring, flashing red light that says, warning, please take care of this. That's like the check engine light on your car. You don't put a piece of tape over it because you don't want to see it or listen to it, okay? Really important. If your seatbelt light is flashing and your car is beeping, it's telling you to put on your seatbelt to save your life. Well, our body gives us those same symptoms in terms of immune, joint, digestive, inflammatory, etc. And then our job is to listen to those early warning signs. Let's do something about this, because if we don't, it doesn't get better on its own. It really doesn't. That's when it ends up as many of the dis-eases we've been led to believe are simply genetic. No, genetic is only and I hate the analogy. I'm not going to use that analogy anymore. But basically, your genetics simply predisposes you to what may go wrong with you if you allow that rain barrel to overflow. That's essentially it, right? So if you end up with the gut issues, if you end up with, having the poor diet, not moving the body, too much stress, not enough sleep, right? Go back to the de-stress protocol. The diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, rest and sleep, okay? Emotional balance, supplements, and success mindset. Now do the reverse of those. If you do the reverse of those, you will eventually get sick. Now, some people with great genetics, nothing may happen until they get in their 60s, right? Those are people with great genetics. Me, I wouldn't say I hit the genetic lottery, 17 years old, debilitating immune issues. And then that's what essentially forced me to leave school for quite some time. My senior year in high school, I had to stop all sports, basically went from someone that prided themselves, worked really hard in school, did well in school, to having massive brain fog, to having fluctuating hot flashes and temperatures, trying to take my SATs for college and just sitting there in all-out full sweat, with my heart beating 150 beats per minute, not because of nervousness, not because of anxiety, because I couldn't regulate my hormones. I couldn't regulate cortisol or any of these neurotransmitters as well in my body. So sure, I was predisposed to it, but I did a lot leading up to it that wasn't very healthy, right? I had a lot of these biofilms and I didn't even know it because I was taking antibiotics every day. And if you know my story, you understand that I didn't knowingly do anything wrong, but it happened because I did it. And now I can say, well, yeah, you shouldn't blame yourself because you didn't know. But I still strongly believe that. But you also, it is your body and you do have to take responsibility for it. And I mean that in an empowering way. It's your body. Nobody else can do it but you. But the great thing is you can do it. It's not that difficult. And hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have already done it before you. So that's the nice thing to know, is that you can do this. If you don't look at the gut, I've told you before, if I could just work on 2 things with people. Okay, you come into my practice, you've got a list of issues, and I can't work on all of them, but you give me 2. What I do is I work on this. I figure out what's wrong with the gut, and I figure out what's the major stress triggers in your life. If I can only do those 2, and I hope other practitioners out there are listening, if I can only work on those 2, I know that I'm going to be able to take care of at least 80 to potentially 90% of the issues in the body. It's that powerful. Yes, there's some extra things in there, and that's why, luckily, I don't have to only work on those 2. But those are 2 of the big ones. Stress affects the gut affects stress. Both of those things affect the immune system, all of that, which affects then inflammation. And then it's just a massive cycle of over and over and over. This happens on a daily basis. So now what do? Well, we need to remove this digestive plaque. This goes for everybody, essentially. But, of course, if you've already done it, you're healthy, you've done your labs, you're good, right? So it's not like you have to do it every year ongoing. It's you need to do it if you're not well. That's a big part of this. So here's what I want to make sure. If you are dealing with some type of mental health-based issue, if you're dealing with an autoimmune issue, if you're dealing with some type of inflammatory-based disorder, if you're dealing with learning-based disabilities, this goes for children as well. Unfortunately, if you look up autism and biofilms, you'll see massive connections. Again, this is scientific literature. This isn't something that I'm pretending and making up. I have no vested interest in that at all. You can look this up specifically, and you can actually tie these specific issues together. Or you have digestive issues, then there's a very good chance that there's a biofilm or digestive plaque buildup regardless of age. So now we need to just do a couple things. This is not going to be massively difficult for you to correct. It's not. We're going to give it 12 weeks. We're not going to try to solve this overnight. The biofilms didn't grow overnight. We're going to gently remove them over time. We use, first and foremost, biofilm disruptors on an empty stomach. Okay. I can no longer link up to any nutritional supplements on this podcast. That is now considered not under FDA guidelines, and we play by the rules. So you will never see on any of my show notes pages a link to nutritional supplements. And I apologize about that. I know that a lot of people want that for ease of use. There's nothing I can do about that. What I want you to think about, though, is where you might be able to find a good biofilm disruptor. Okay, that's all that I can say. And you're going to look for ingredients like proteases. You're going to look for other enzymes such as hemicellulase. You're going to look for something that might have chitosanase. You're going to look for serrapeptase. And what you're essentially looking at is something that's going to dissolve naturally, harmlessly, the fibrinogen or fibrin, the protein-based connections, the biofilm mucoid plaque itself. That is what you're working on. So we are dissolving that, and that's why we're taking these enzymes on an empty stomach, typically 2 upon waking and 2 before bed. Simple, a half hour to an hour before food, and then 2-3 hours after dinner. That's it. That's all you're going to do. You say, well, I eat dinner right before bed. That's not ideal. I just want to share that with you. But if that's the case, you can always take all 4 upon waking. Okay, so we need a good biofilm disrupting enzyme. That's it. All right, so not difficult. That's what we're going to do. Then we also want to include fasting. Okay, so we want to include 12 hours, maybe 14, maybe if it starts earlier in the night, 16. Okay, so we want to use intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting by itself is not enough. A lot of people like to use intermittent fasting as a cure-all. Listen, intermittent fasting is fantastic. The longer you do it, not necessarily the better, okay? The longer fast can be done weekly or quarterly, but not daily. I've talked about that on a previous show as well. But intermittent fasting is not enough to dissolve biofilms. That's not exactly how it works, okay? Helpful, but not the end-all, be-all, okay? So Just like biofilm disruptors, the enzymes are not the end-all, be-all. You also then want to do something like the CBO protocol or something like that. I will link up what the CBO protocol is through a podcast, not it itself. You don't have to use the formula I created, which is the CBO protocol, okay? You don't have to, but it shows you exactly what we do and help people with all around the world. But you can also work with your local integrative health practitioner, naturopathic doctor, functional medicine doctor, anyone that specializes in these digestive issues. Okay, so you have that. And that's going to help with yeast, it's going to help with fungus, it's going to help with bacteria. Those are all great things that, of course, are some of the underlying root causes why it might be there in the first place. Then we want to replenish, right? That's all part of the CBO protocol as well. We want to replenish, we want to create balance back through the microbiome, the actual garden that lives in your gut, the 28 plus feet of digestive tract. Another nice thing to do, not mandatory, but a nice thing to do 3 weeks or 6 weeks after you begin a protocol like the CBO, is that you want to use some type of intestinal cleanse. An intestinal cleanse in and of itself is not a cure-all or some type of panacea. I want to demystify this. Actually, I did a podcast on a cleanse versus juicing versus detox. I would love you to listen to that show as well. Maybe my team can link that up today as well at stephencabral.com/1678. That'll be 3 podcasts linked up today. Okay, so here's the thing. An intestinal cleanse, just to demystify it, is using herbs like senna or cascara as an Ayurvedic herb to get the bowels moving. It's a laxative, and that actually helps stimulate peristaltic movement, which helps to stimulate the removal of anything in the intestines. That can be helpful when combined with a binder such as bentonite clay, which is my favorite. A good one to use in addition to bentonite clay could be a zeolite or a charcoal, but those are not as good as the bentonite clay because the bentonite clay actually has a natural charge to it that allows it to do more binding and attaching to the sides of what is stuck to your intestines. So that's one of my favorites. And again, you can look up intestinal cleanse on one of my previous shows. And of course, you can check out the company that I formulate for if you choose to. All right. So there's one more thing that's really important to me that you know as well, because we've been getting really great results with it, but we hardly ever talk about it on the podcast. And that is coffee enemas. And one of the reasons why I don't talk about them maybe a lot is because they're like the next level. So people are saying, okay, I'll get more sleep. I'll work on my nutrition. I'll add in some more veggies. I will work on my stress. But coffee enemas, well, they were asking a bit too much there. And I understand that. Coffee enemas are optional. I haven't done a coffee enema myself for a long period of time. I really haven't. Haven't had a need to. Could I benefit from it? Absolutely. But when you have an issue, it's good to work on it. And when I was working on my specific issues, you better believe I was doing coffee enemas. And you can do them once a week, not a problem at all. You could do them more often in the beginning if needed and working with a practitioner that you know can kind of share some tips with you. Now, I did a podcast on coffee enemas, so you're welcome to go back and check that one out. We won't link that one up today, but you can just go to stephencabral.com/podcast and search for that. Now, why coffee enemas? Well, what coffee enemas do, it's not a colonic or anything like that. It actually stimulates the production of bile. It stimulates the liver ducts. It dilates the liver ducts. It stimulates the production of something called glutathione S-transferase, a precursor and part of the mother antioxidant, as we call it at Natural Health, that allows for detoxification of the body. So really, really powerful. Plus, it is toxic to any gut bugs that may be living in the last, I should say, 3 to 5 feet of the colon or so, where that coffee is actually entering before it gets pulled up to the liver and then back down to your colon again. So just in our practice, just in the last week, we got someone sending in, again, this is not saying that this happened specifically because of this, but they're on some of our protocols, which I'm not going to name because now we're talking about parasites, and they passed multiple parasites. One of them was a 12-inch long tapeworm. A 12-inch long tapeworm. One of our health coaches sent it over to me and they said, could you confirm what this is? And I said, well, we're not diagnosing any disease here. We're not providing any treatments. We're not providing any cures. But if you put that image of that thing that came out of that person and you put it next to this image, well, you can make your own conclusions, but that certainly looks like a 12-inch tapeworm. So you have to understand as these things really work. They've worked for thousands of years. In Ayurveda, during Panchakama, there would be something called basti, and basti would be a medicated enema using herbs that are toxic to the gut bugs inside of that colon. But also it was a purgation. It was a removal of what was inside of the body. So just keep in mind, these things do work. Not one better than the other, but as we use them as one complete protocol, we can begin to allow the body to be in a position to heal itself. Hopefully today's podcast was helpful. I know I've been way over in my time this week. Hopefully this information has been helpful, though. I'm going to get back on track with more of the 22-minute or so shows next week. A lot to say. I could go on, but what I'd love you to do is, if this show is helpful, if you think it could help anyone, please do feel free to share this show with someone you believe it could serve. Ever wonder what the best sauna, blue blockers, sleep trackers, wake lights, salt lamps, or other health gadgets are? Or what about the top non-toxic mattresses, sheets, soaps, bath products, toothpaste, and cookware? Or would you like to know the cleanest choices for hemp parts, meal delivery services, supplements, and much more? I personally curated, researched, and now created a resource page of all of my top picks that continues to grow each week. These are the exact products I use in my own life, with my family, in my private practice, and they're the ones I trust. To find out all of my up-to-date recommendations and all the details, simply head on over to stevencabral.com/resources.